E3 2019 has come and gone, and while Nintendo's presentation was really solid overall, the one thing we were all missing out on was Monolith Soft's logo popping up at the beginning of a trailer for one of their new games. Despite that though, now that we've seen what was and was not revealed at E3, I have a very good idea at what's going on at Monolith Soft and what games they're currently working on, as well as a general idea of the development schedule, and so I am going to talk about this now in order to stop people from spouting misinformation and stuff, because this is stuff based on their recruitment, their descriptions on their website, and their past history. It's not just random speculation, and I hope I can nip some conspiracy theories and wild, stupid speculation in the bud right now. As of early May, they have 209 employees split between 5 physical development studios, 1 in Kyoto and 4 in Tokyo, including their headquarters, which looks suspiciously like their logo. They might have 5 entirely separate teams at each studio, but I only know of 4 projects in the works, so we're going to be treating this as 4 teams, and I'm just going to say that the majority of their people are probably on Xenoblade, so Xenoblade takes up 2 studios. Now, people for some reason get really mad when I refer to the A team or the B team or whatever, so I'm not going to give them preferential names, I'm going to give them letters that sort of describe what they're doing. So, they have 4 teams right now. We're going to just call them Team X, Team O, Team Z, and Team N, and all of these names will make sense very shortly. Now, as for the projects that we know as a fact they are working on, let's get the obvious one out of the way, Team X, which yeah, I know I said I wasn't going to give preferential names, but this is their first division. This is Tetsuya Takahashi's Xenoblade Chronicles team. They started recruiting for the next Xenoblade game several months ago now, and that is what this team is working on. After the immense success of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, there's no way they aren't going to make another Xenoblade game, because, like, why would you not at this point? They have a ridiculous amount of momentum and a huge opportunity to grow the series and finish telling the perfect work story. Now, there's a bit of weird information going around, and people genuinely don't know how far in development this game actually is, but I think I could put a pretty decent time frame on it. We know as a fact now from the previous interview, the previous Xenoblade news video, that when they start developing a new RPG, Takahashi first writes the story and develops the world and characters, and then hands it to the other developers to tweak, and then they start making the actual game part. Now he says it takes him about 8 months to do that. And Xenoblade 2 has been out for a year and a half. You might be wondering, okay, but they updated it, they added DLC, what happened to Torna? Well, the thing is, Torna was a draft scrap for Xenoblade 2 that got fleshed out into a full game. There is no way Takahashi needed to put the same amount of work he did into Torna as he did the base game of Xenoblade 2, and even after that, there was the time when they were making the game part of it, where he could be very hands-off with his supervision and start writing the scenario for the next game. It's also worth keeping in mind that they adapted criticism from the base game of Xenoblade 2 into Torna as it was coming out, which means that he was probably taking note of the criticism. They did this for Xenosaga as well, so certain adaptations to the story of the next game in response to criticisms of Xenoblade 2 are probably in there. So, Torna's been out for over half a year, Xenoblade 2 has been out for over a year and a half, which means there was already plenty of time for Takahashi to get 8 months of writing in, and for them to start actually working on the project. Now, it was in October 2018 when they put out recruitment for the next Xenoblade game, and I'm going to say that they probably started full production by then. As in, they're not just conceptualizing things, they're actually putting code into their computers and making a game out of it. Does that mean we're going to see a game soon? No, it does not. This game is most likely going to be a 2021 or 2022 title, just because it's a Xenoblade game, they're enormous, they take a lot of time to make, and after the wacky times that were had in Xenoblade 2's development cycle, they're probably going to want to take things slower and make sure it's as polished as it could possibly be. They also, interestingly enough, specify what kind of people they want in their recruitment page. That makes a lot of sense, but for that Xeno recruitment, they specifically asked for people who were mid-career, so not newbies. They have open recruitment for newbies, and I think they do have it actively going on still, so they are taking recent graduates, but it's worth noting that they wanted experienced developers to work on the Xenoblade series, because I guess they wanted it to be good. Second in obviousness, we're going to go to Team Z, which is almost certainly working on the sequel to Breath of the Wild that we just saw at E3. Now, Monolith Soft did work on Breath of the Wild. They didn't go in working on Breath of the Wild. They were recruited by Nintendo, as in 60 Monolith Soft employees were taken from the 100 or so who were working on Xenoblade 2 to work on Breath of the Wild because Nintendo's own team couldn't figure out the open world. And they were tapped for their experience, probably in X specifically, because that's closest to Breath of the Wild, and that's why Monolith Soft is so credited in it, and why I consider Breath of the Wild a Monolith Soft game, and that Monolith basically saved it from being awful. That's the reason Xenoblade 2 isn't as polished as it is too, because they had only 40% of the people in order to iron out the kinks in the gameplay and all the bugs and stuff. That does mean, though, that if they have a designated Xenoblade team and a designated Zelda team, that now both games are going to go through a full development cycle with the full amount of people, so not only are we going to get a Switch Xenoblade game that has the proper number of developers for its entire cycle, but we're going to get a Switch Zelda game that's not held back by the limitations of the Wii U, so look forward to both of those games. I'm sure they're going to be great. When is this Zelda coming out? Probably not too soon, because, well, Breath of the Wild has been out for a while now, but we don't know when they decided to start development on the sequel. It's very possible Nintendo was like, okay, yeah, this is successful, let's throw in some ideas we didn't use to the base game or DLC and get working on a Majora's Mask style sequel already, but what we don't know is whether or not they knew they were going with Monolith to begin with. If they did, that would make Monolith Soft the second studio, besides early 2000s Capcom in one of their golden eras, to be handed a main series Zelda title in order to make. Now, obviously, we don't know if Monolith is actually heading the project, but after the success of Breath of the Wild, they're probably going to want them to take a more advanced role, and as such, Monolith now has a dedicated Legend of Zelda team that they started recruiting people for only a couple months ago. That thing came out in March at the anniversary of Breath of the Wild, and we only now got the game revealed, which seems to me like development has only recently started, and that was very much a teaser trailer for a game that's well over a year out. Will it take a lot less time to develop compared to Breath of the Wild because they're using a similar engine and they have people with more experience, and Monolith already knows what they're getting into? Yes, but is it going to be a 2020 game? Probably not. 2021 and 2022, one of them's going to be Xenoblade and one of them's going to be Zelda. I don't think they're going to be able to do two in the same year like they did in 2017. It's worth noting two more things. First off, Monolith is no stranger to Zelda even before Breath of the Wild. They've actually helped out in some capacity on every main series Zelda game since Skyward Sword. So that's 8 years of Zelda and 4 games, including this Breath of the Wild sequel. Even though, obviously, the first Botwa was the one where they first had a major involvement, and it wasn't just them acting in their capacity of supporting other main Nintendo studios. It's also worth noting that in their Zelda recruitment, they were again asking for mid-career developers, which suggests that about then was when serious work finally started on Breath of the Wild 2, and they were looking for people who knew what they were doing and were able to assist in basically doing that big of an undertaking. They're recruiting enough people for them to effectively split their main open world developer into a Xenoblade part and a Zelda part in order to get both games done at the same time, and it's interesting because they are definitely working on both at the same time, yet again. Let's move on to Team O next, because this is kind of a weird case. I believe that this group is working on a new IP from Monolith, namely a medieval fantasy action game or action RPG. Why do I think this is still happening? We did see the recruitment for it in 2017 and some awesome concept art, but the game itself has never surfaced. It's almost been 2 years. Well, there are a few reasons behind this. First off, I've been under the impression so far, and I think it makes sense, that they only start recruiting new people for a project once it's officially underway. This, as well as the Zelda and Xenoblade projects, were all looking for senior developers who had skills in certain areas. As such, if you're recruiting someone for a specific job that isn't just make games for us, it's make games of a certain type or in a certain way or do a certain thing, they're going to want to make sure the project those people are working on is 100% slated to be going on still before they start hiring people, at risk of them not actually having a job if they do get hired. So it's been almost 2 years, and it's not unheard of for a game to be in development for 2 years before it's officially revealed. And also, because we know as a fact that this game can't be Breath of the Wild 2. Now, why do I say this? First off, the recruitment came out before Breath of the Wild 1's DLC was even fully announced. Yes, they almost certainly had started planning work on the sequel while that was happening. I doubt they would have gone into full development and started hiring new people for the project before the original one was even finished and fully wrapped when it came to its DLC. Second off is the phrasing of the recruitment itself. They mentioned that they were recruiting people for an ambitious medieval fantasy game with action elements that was different from usual Monolith soft fare. So, yeah, a Breath of the Wild style Zelda game definitely fits medieval fantasy action game or even action RPG with stuff Breath of the Wild added, but is it not Monolith Soft's usual fare? Like I said, they've worked on Zelda games plenty already for the better part of a decade, and also, in terms of tone and stuff, yeah, Botwa 2 is far darker than the previous game, but is Mummy Ganondorf really that much darker than half the stuff that goes down in the Xeno series? Not really. It seems surprisingly a good tone match for what Monolith Soft usually does, and that's why I think they're a very good studio to handle the property. Now, what I am thinking, though, is that this game that's supposed to be a different tone or a different style from what Monolith usually does, not only because it's not an RPG, which would probably lead to a bigger learning curve and developers would need to take more time getting used to a genre they're not used to, but also that it is an M-rated game. It's on record that Monolith employees have said that the studio wants to branch out and do more stuff, namely tackling things like eroticism or just general more mature topics, and I think this game could be where they're starting to do this. I'm thinking something more of a Witcher or Dark Souls type vibe as opposed to the much more anime-inspired, more overtly light with darker undertones things like recent Xeno games and Breath of the Wild. There is still, of course, the distinct possibility that the game's been canned for various reasons. They didn't think it would pan out well, or go over well, or they just weren't having good luck with the development, and they figured it wasn't ever going to get done, or Nintendo pulled the plug. But I don't think that's the case. Sure, Takahashi very recently mentioned that Xenoblade was the only proposal they had to Nintendo that's been approved recently, but remember, they opened recruitment for Xenoblade in October 2018, while they opened recruitment for this in August of 2017. We also don't know exactly when that interview was taken, but we also don't know what his time frame for recent is. Clearly, if the whole new Xenoblade recruitment thing was October 2018, that counts as recently, but we don't know how far back he's thinking. It could be then and beyond. They submitted 8 or 9 proposals since then and none of them got approved, or before that, but I don't think he meant he was going as far back as 2017, because, again, to open recruitment for a project implies that the proposal went through. It could have had the plug pulled later on, but I doubt that. So, if the game's been in development for almost 2 years, why haven't we seen anything of it yet? Well, first off, Nintendo's been playing their cards a lot closer to their chest lately than they have in past console generations. Seemingly learning from Breath of the Wild's endless dev cycle, they're not revealing games with anything more than a short teaser, unless they're going to release within a year of that reveal. Again, it makes sense. 2 years isn't exactly enough time for a studio not used to a genre and recruiting new people to finish an entire game, so I could very much see this being a 2020 release, and then having 3 years of Monolith games coming out with that game, then a Xenoblade and Zelda following up in the years later. But again, if it's a 2020 release, why haven't we seen it yet? Well, it could be a late 2020 release. They could not exactly know their release window yet. Like, I think Luigi's Mansion 3 has a 2019 release, and we're halfway done with 2019. So I don't know what they're doing there. I don't know if they know how much time it's going to take to finish polishing or whatever, and that's why it doesn't have a concrete release date. It could be a situation like that, but it could also be a situation of not wanting their games to overstep each other, because Astral Chain was revealed in 2019 and is coming out in 2019. It is an action game. I'm thinking that if Monolith is working on an action game that's a new IP, they wouldn't want to have it revealed before Astral Chain releases, because then you'd have 2 Switch-exclusive action games from brand new IPs competing with each other for players' attention, and they'd rather not show off the next action game to play until after that one's out. you might be recalling me seemingly getting myself hyped up for seeing this game, both for E3 and the direct preceding it, but that wasn't so much me saying, yeah, they're gonna reveal this game, I'm hyped and excited to see what it's about. That was more me thinking, this is the earliest they could conceivably show this off and have it make sense, and release within a timely manner from its reveal, so we're gonna see it eventually, this is just the first chance we have, so I might as well get a little excited. Of course, after Astral Chain was revealed and revealed to be coming soon, I figured that they'd push this to the back burner, and I'm expecting we're going to have to wait for its release to happen before we see this game revealed, so we might have to wait until a late 2019 Direct to see anything on it, and that's assuming development's going smoothly and they haven't run into roadblocks that would cause them to delay it even more. Speaking of action games that are on a delay though, and seem to be going through dev hell, there's a decent chance that we're going to see Astral Chain revealed and released, then this Monolith action game revealed and released, before we get any more Bayonetta 3 news, and that's depressing, so I want to talk about Team N instead. This team is Monolith's Kyoto branch, and the one that I've talked about a lot as being the guys who help out Nintendo with things. Basically, this isn't a team that works on games on their own or takes a prominent role in projects. This is a team that helps out on other Nintendo-developed games by Nintendo themselves' main studios that are located at their headquarters in Kyoto. As in, if a game is listed as being developed by Nintendo, not developed by Monolith Soft, and published by Nintendo, and Monolith is in the credits, it's likely this team that had some work on it, be it testing, debugging, cutscenes, or the like. They seem to have done a bunch of different things for a bunch of different games. So, what is Team N working on? Well, based on their past, I think they're, surprisingly enough, working on Animal Crossing New Horizons. Why do I think this? Well, before I go through the Monolith history, it's worth explaining why this game took so long to be revealed. Animal Crossing and Splatoon are developed by the same team. As in, their releases were New Leaf, Splatoon, Happy Home Designer, Splatoon 2, and now New Horizons being in development after Splatoon 2 is finally winding down, all of its content's out, all of its Splatfests are out. After the Octo expansion release, they had enough time to start fully dedicating to Animal Crossing, and now their entire team is working on that. Presumably, they misunderestimated how things were going, and that's what led to the delay. So, why do I think Monolith is working on that? Well, they are credited with New Leaf, Splatoon, Happy Home Designer, and Splatoon 2. They have worked with this team extensively in a supporting role. While yes, it was this group of Monolith people who also helped out on Pikmin 3, Link Between Worlds, and probably Skyward Sword as well, they have a very long-running relationship with this specific team, so I think that they are doing support work here, and we might end up seeing people from Monolith's other teams bleed over if Animal Crossing is having trouble meeting this later deadline too, so hopefully it's not enough people to cause an issue like what happened with Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade 2, but I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see some Xenoblade people or the like end up in the credits for New Horizons. So yeah, 4 Monolith teams and 4 games. And this is a pretty stacked lineup encompassing a lot of genres and a lot of popular IPs. We've got, pretty much guaranteed unless it's delayed again, March 2020, Animal Crossing. We've got, likely later in the year 2020, a new IP action game. This will be Nintendo's 3rd new IP this decade, so pretty big deal that it's Monolith getting to do it and not an in-house main Nintendo studio like with Splatoon and ARMS. Then, somewhere between 2021 and 2022, a sequel to Breath of the Wild and a new Xenoblade game. That is ridiculous, and I don't think it would be overstepping my bounds to call Monolith Nintendo's best studio right now, just because of how many quality projects they have worked on and seem to be working on right now. Before we go, though, I would like to talk about a couple things, because it's worth bringing up things that Monolith is definitely not working on. The first of those is any sort of port, remake, or remaster of a previous Xenoblade title. They are not doing this. Xenoblade Chronicles has already been ported to the 3DS and was handled by a different studio. If it gets remastered or remade or somehow brought to Switch, Monolith will not be doing that. They like to focus on the future and new games. This was drilled into them after both Xenogears and Xenosaga ended prematurely and left them unable to do sequels. That's their thing. They like moving on and not dwelling on the past. The one time they've expressed wanting to return to something other than probably finishing perfect works, which they're doing with Xenoblade, is to reimagine Xenoblade X. Not remake, not port. Reimagine, as in remake the entire thing from the ground up following its original vision and not the one they got. And for that, they said that they would need a lot more money, a lot more time, and a lot more staff. I don't think they said all of those things, but that was the implication. So, if X goes to Switch, it's not Monolith doing it. If Xenoblade HD gets revealed, it's not Monolith doing it. They might lend a little bit with the art, but they're not going to be remaking their own game up from scratch. Nintendo has studios to do that. I don't know why this got in people's minds, but it's not going to be what happens. Are they going to be in the credits for those games? Yes, because they made the originals. But they're not going to handle the bringing it to Switch themselves. The other thing that I've surprisingly seen people talk about is thinking that Monolith is working on Pokemon Sword and Shield because of the Wild area, basically. Like, yeah, we get it. They helped on Breath of the Wild because it has a big open area, which is similar to what they're good at with Xenoblade. We get it. Obviously, the Wild area is taking cues from Xenoblade and from Breath of the Wild. Both of them are games Monolith worked on. That does not mean that Monolith itself is working on it. There are plenty of other RPGs that have taken hints from Xenoblade in designing their world, making it bigger and more explorable and that stuff. Is Monolith working on Final Fantasy 15? That obviously took a lot of inspiration from the original Xenoblade. And they didn't hire Monolith back from Nintendo to do that. Like, just because it takes inspiration from Xenoblade doesn't mean the Xenoblade people are working on it. Now, yeah, it's in Nintendo, but also Game Freak, I don't think at all works with other Nintendo studios in order to make main series Pokemon games. And also, just like, look at the Sword and Shield footage. It doesn't look good enough to be Monolith. Compare it to Xenoblade 1 on the Wii. Xenoblade 1 looks better, and comparing it to X or 2 is not even a fair comparison. Obviously, Pokemon has a much simpler art style, but in terms of general technical stuff, the Xenoblade titles obviously blow it away. The other thing is, well, I know I basically bashed Game Freak for not making it look as good as other Switch titles. What we've seen so far from the Wild area is not above their pay grade in terms of what they're capable of doing. Is Game Freak known for being god-awful programmers? Yes. Is what we've seen of the Wild area so far more than they could handle? Probably not. Will it be implemented well? I don't know yet. But what I do know is that Sun and Moon pushed the 3DS to their limits and were clearly held back by that hardware, and they had some pretty big and pretty expansive environments that look relatively on par in terms of detail with what we've seen so far from Sword and Shield. So that means that now that they're on a much more powerful system, they're able to, say, stitch together some of those bigger and more detailed Sun and Moon areas, because they can load all of that on screen at once, into something the size of the Wild area, and up the detail because they're on an HD console and it actually matters. So, is it as technically good as a Monolith game? No. But is it something Game Freak could definitely do themselves? Yes. So, well, yes, they probably should try hiring more people for the next Pokemon game who are better programmers, better at optimizing things, and better at thinking outside the box to get things like the National Dex in all their games. Yes. But did they need Monolith to make the Wild area a reality? No. And yeah, that's all I got. It's kind of funny that this ended up being longer than the last main video I made, but I thought this was kind of important to combat the misinformation that I know is going to come out. So I figured it's probably a good idea to have a blatant Monolith Soft fanboy yell at you in your face for 25 minutes as to what they're actually doing before any of that stuff has a chance to come out. Xenoblade fans, you're the majority of people watching this, and I know it kind of sucks to hear that we're probably not going to get a new game until 2021, but what are you going to do? But hey, this does give you time to not only hype yourself up a bit more, but maybe check out the Xenoblade games you haven't yet, or other Monolith Soft titles that you didn't know about or didn't even know they worked on at all. Of course, you could still try out Xenogears and Xenosaga. And of course, expand your horizons. If you're just looking for JRPGs, the Switch is a JRPG powerhouse now. There is no shortage of great games that you could try out. And if you're an X fan looking for something more like that, well, just now in 2019 we've got some stuff coming up. You can get back in the robot to pilot it around and fight aliens in Daemon X Machina, and you could be a stand-using driver protecting the streets of NLA as a member of Space Patrol Delta and Astral Chain. So, while for Monolith Soft the near future doesn't look bright, for the Switch, oh god, there's plenty of stuff to tide you over until even just Animal Crossing in 9 months' time. And until next time, this is Luxin, signing off.